My name is Phillip Anderson, 62 years old, third-generation farmer from Blue Creek, Nebraska. I never imagined my daughter Jessica's wedding would turn into a nightmare. After spending my life building our family farm, her new husband, Blake Thornton, demanded I hand over the keys right there at the reception in front of 200 guests. When I refused, he slapped me so hard I nearly fell. As I walked out to clear my head, I made a phone call that changed everything. While I share how a family farm became a battlefield that day, let me know where you're watching from, and hit subscribe if you believe some things are worth standing up for, no matter the cost. Our family farm sits on 320 acres of some of the finest soil in Nebraska. The Andersons have worked this land since my grandfather bought it in 1897, with money saved from years of sharecropping. What started as a struggling homestead with a single mule and wooden plow grew into a thriving agricultural business that has weathered over a century of challenges. I still remember my grandfather sitting me on his knee when I was just 6 years old, his weathered hands pointing across our fields. "This land tells our family story, Philip," he'd say. "Every fence post, every barn board, every inch of soil holds the sweat and dreams of Andersons before you." I didn't fully understand the weight of his words then, but they became my life's foundation. When I took over from my father at 28, I had a fresh degree in agricultural science and big ideas for modernizing our operations. Dad was skeptical of my book learning, but he trusted me enough to step back. Those early years weren't easy. I made mistakes, expanded too quickly into dairy, before scaling back to focus on our core crops of corn, soybeans, and wheat. Eventually, I found the right balance between innovation and the time-tested wisdom passed down through generations. The 1980s nearly broke us with the worst drought in 50 years. I remember standing in fields so dry the soil cracked like shattered pottery. We lost almost everything that year. The bank started making noise about foreclosure, joining the chorus of financial institutions, claiming family farms across the Midwest. I took a second mortgage, worked nights at the grain elevator in town, and somehow kept us afloat while neighbors were forced to sell. Then came the financial crisis of 2008. Crop prices plummeted, while fuel and fertilizer costs soared. But we adapted, diversifying into specialty organic sections that commanded premium prices. We installed solar panels to reduce energy costs and implemented no-till practices that improved our soil health while reducing expenses. Against all odds, the Anderson farm not only survived, but thrived. Through it all, there was Martha, my wife and partner in everything. We met at the state fair when I was 23, both of us judging the 4-H livestock competition. She was from a farm 3 counties over, understood the life, and never complained about the long hours or financial uncertainties. Martha brought warmth and laughter to our farmhouse, transforming it from a simple dwelling into a true home. When Jessica was born in 1994, our joy was complete. From the beginning, she was the perfect blend of both of us, Martha's gentle beauty and my stubborn determination. Jessica's first steps were taken in our north field during harvest. Her earliest memories were of riding on my shoulders as I checked irrigation lines or helping Martha gather eggs from our small chicken coop. The farm wasn't just our business, it was Jessica's playground, classroom, and heritage. Martha and I always assumed Jessica would eventually take over the farm, not because we pressured her, but because she showed such natural affinity for the work. By 12, she could drive a tractor better than hired hands twice her age. She raised prize-winning cattle for the county fair and started her own organic vegetable stand that became surprisingly profitable. Jessica had both the practical skills and the passion for farming life. Then came the darkest chapter of our lives. When Jessica was 16, Martha was diagnosed with aggressive breast cancer. Despite the best treatments available, the disease moved quickly. Within 8 months, my beloved wife was gone, leaving Jessica and me to navigate our grief together while keeping the farm running. Those years following Martha's death tested us both. Jessica stepped up in ways no teenager should have to handling household responsibilities, while maintaining her grades and farm duties. We became an even stronger team. Though the absence of Martha's laughter left a silence neither of us knew how to fill. Many evenings we would sit on the porch swing. Martha loved watching the sunset, in wordless understanding of our shared loss and determination to honor her memory through our continued care of the land. Jessica's college decision surprised and delighted me. Rather than drifting away from agricultural life as many farm kids do, she chose to major in agricultural business at the state university. "I want to bring the farm into the future, Dad," she explained, with the confidence that reminded me so much of her mother. "We can expand our organic operation, maybe add agritourism components, create a farm-to-table connection." Her enthusiasm was infectious, and I began to truly believe the Anderson legacy would continue to flourish under her guidance. Everything changed during Jessica's senior year of college. She met Blake Thornton at a business school mixer, where his investment club and her agricultural entrepreneurship group were paired for a joint project. Blake came from old Chicago money, his family owning a successful commercial real estate development company. He was handsome, articulate, and clearly smitten with my daughter. At first, Jessica would come home on weekends bubbling with excitement about new business concepts Blake had introduced her to. I was happy to see her passionate about combining traditional farming with modern business approaches. But gradually, her visits became less frequent. When she did come home, she spent more time on her laptop or phone than walking the fields or helping with chores. Something was shifting, though. I couldn't quite identify what. The first time Jessica brought Blake to the farm, I tried to reserve judgment. His designer clothes and luxury car seemed comically out of place on our gravel driveway, but I reminded myself not to be the stereotype of the suspicious farmer father. Blake's handshake was firm, his smile bright, but something felt performative in his interest about our operation. "So this whole spread must be worth, what, 4 or 5 million?" he asked within the first hour of his visit, gesturing broadly at my fields. "The land has value," I replied carefully, "but we don't think of it that way. It's our livelihood and our heritage." Blake nodded as if he understood, but I caught the calculating look in his eyes. "Still, with property values in this region appreciating annually at around 3%, and agricultural land becoming scarce. You're sitting on a gold mine, sir." Throughout his visit, Blake's questions consistently centered on finances, property values, and development potential. Not once did he ask about crop rotation strategies, livestock management, or the seasonal rhythm of farm life that Jessica had grown up loving. When I showed him our newest tractor, an investment that had taken 3 years to save, for he seemed unimpressed, and quickly steered the conversation to how much the surrounding land was selling for, per acre. After Blake left that Sunday evening, I voiced my concerns to Jessica. "Honey, I'm not sure Blake understands what this place means to us. He seems to see the farm as an asset to be leveraged rather than a living, breathing entity." Jessica's reaction surprised me. "Dad, you're being old-fashioned. Of course Blake sees the business potential he's getting his MBA, but that doesn't mean he doesn't respect what we do. He has big ideas for how we could maximize profitability." Her words troubled me particularly, the shift from I to we when discussing the farm's future. Later that month, I discovered Blake had been researching zoning regulations and development codes for our county. A friend who worked at the assessor's office mentioned that someone from Thornton Development had inquired about recent land sales and property tax assessments in our area. When confronted, Jessica brushed it off as Blake being thorough about understanding her background. Despite my reservations, I made genuine efforts to connect with my future son-in-law. I invited him on fishing trips, asked about his family history, and tried to share the deeper joys of agricultural life that couldn't be captured on a balance sheet. Blake participated politely, but always seemed to be looking past me towards some future configuration of our land that existed only in his mind. As Jessica's graduation approached, I made an important decision. I updated my will and farm succession plan, intending to transfer ownership to Jessica after she married. However, I added specific conditions. The land must remain agricultural for at least 20 years, and any major changes would require mutual agreement between Jessica and me while I was still alive. It was my compromise between protecting our legacy and trusting my daughter's judgment. I never imagined how quickly that trust would be tested. The proposal came with all the grandeur characteristic of Blake Thornton. He flew Jessica to Paris, proposed beneath the Eiffel Tower, with a diamond ring that cost more than my annual farm income, and had a photographer capture the entire scene. Jessica called me from their hotel room, voice bubbling with excitement to share the news. I offered sincere congratulations, while noting that Blake hadn't spoken to me beforehand, a traditional courtesy I would have appreciated. "Dad, that's so old-fashioned," Jessica laughed. "Blake is spontaneous and romantic. He wanted it to be a complete surprise." I swallowed my disappointment and focused on her happiness. "I'm thrilled for you, sweetheart. When you two come back, we'll celebrate properly at the farm." There was a pause before she responded. "Actually, Blake's parents are throwing us an engagement party at their country club next weekend. They've already booked everything. Maybe you could drive up to Chicago." That phone call set the pattern for the entire wedding planning process. I was consistently informed of decisions after they'd been made, rather than included in the discussions. The Thorntons took control with seemingly unlimited resources and firm ideas about how everything should be done. Their wedding planner, an imperious woman named Vivian, with a permanent expression of polite disdain, coordinated details via brief formal emails that felt more like notifications than consultations. When I suggested hosting the rehearsal dinner at a beloved family restaurant near our farm, the idea was politely but firmly rejected. "The Thornton family has a long-standing relationship with Chef Marcel at the Peninsula," Vivian informed me. "He's creating a custom 7-course tasting menu that complements their wine selection." The implication was clear. My modest proposal couldn't possibly meet their standards. The guest list expanded from what Jessica had once described as a small family ceremony to over 200 people, most of whom I'd never met. Names of business associates, political connections, and Chicago socialites dominated the spreadsheet I was eventually sent for reference. Our side consisted of barely 30 guests, mostly neighbors and family friends, who had known Jessica since childhood. Most painful was the discussion about the wedding venue. Throughout her life, Jessica had talked about getting married on our farm. She had described the perfect spot under the ancient oak tree where generations of Andersons had taken family photos. We'd even built a special arbor together during one of her college breaks, ostensibly for growing climbing roses. But with the unspoken understanding, it would someday frame her wedding ceremony. "Jessica, what about our oak tree?" I asked during one of her brief visits home. "Your mother would have loved to see you married there. Remember how we always talked about stringing lights through the branches?" A flicker of wistfulness crossed her face before she shook her head. "The Thorntons have already put deposits down on the grand ballroom at the Winthrop Hotel. Blake's family has held every important event there for 3 generations. Besides Dad, what would Blake's business associates think about driving all the way out here to a farm wedding?" "They might think your heritage matters," I said quietly. "Don't make this difficult." Jessica sighed. "The farm isn't practical for the kind of event we're planning." When I offered to contribute financially to the wedding, hoping it might give me some say in the proceedings, Blake's father, Gerald, intercepted the conversation. "That's completely unnecessary, Philip," he said, with the confident tone of someone accustomed to being the final authority. "We consider it our privilege to give the children the celebration they deserve. Perhaps you can focus on giving Jessica away. That's the important part for a father, isn't it?" I felt increasingly sidelined in my own daughter's life. The Jessica who returned from Chicago for occasional weekends seemed different, absorbed in wedding magazines, showing celebrations that bore no resemblance to our life or values. She spoke differently, too, adopting terminology and social concerns that belonged to the Thornton world. Conversations about crop yields and cattle prices, once our easy common ground, were replaced with discussions of reception seating arrangements and bridesmaids' shoe coordination. 2 months before the wedding, I overheard a conversation that confirmed my worst fears. I had driven to Chicago to drop off some of Jessica's childhood mementos she wanted to incorporate into a wedding display. Arriving at the Thornton mansion earlier than expected, I was directed to wait in a study adjacent to Gerald's home office. The door between rooms was ajar, and voices carried clearly neither Blake nor his father aware of my presence. "The Anderson farm is the perfect anchor property," Gerald was saying. "Once we control those 320 acres, we can approach the surrounding landowners with leverage. The entire development hinges on securing that central parcel." "Jessica's completely on board," Blake replied confidently. "She's excited about transforming the property into something modern and profitable. The old man's the only obstacle." "Has she signed anything yet?" "Not officially, but she's agreed in principle. We'll handle the paperwork right after the wedding. She understands that sentimentality doesn't pay the bills. That farm is underperforming financially when you consider its development potential." Gerald's laugh was cold. "Blue Creek Acres Resort and Golf Community will put Thornton development back on top after the Lincoln Heights project fell through. Premium vacation properties with agricultural theming, farm-to-table restaurants, using a small portion of the original fields for authenticity, luxury cabins with rural views, all just a reasonable drive from 3 major cities." "What about Philip?" Gerald asked. "Will he be a problem?" "He's a simple farmer," Blake dismissed. "Once Jessica inherits, she'll make the decisions. He'll come around when he sees the financial benefits. Worst case, we'll give him a cottage on the property, let him grow tomatoes or whatever to feel useful." My hands shook as I quietly left the study, and the house, the box of Jessica's keepsakes still in my arms. I sat in my truck in the Thornton's circular driveway for nearly an hour, trying to process what I'd heard. My daughter, my Jessica, had apparently agreed to transform our family's multi-generational legacy into a resort playground for wealthy urbanites. The farm that had weathered Dust Bowl's depressions and countless hardships would be carved up for golf courses and vacation homes. When I finally confronted Jessica that evening, she denied any formal agreement. "Blake and his father just throw ideas around, Dad. Yes, we've discussed some potential developments someday, but nothing's decided. Blake says the farm could be much more profitable with some strategic investments." "Our farm isn't just about profit," I insisted. "It's about sustainability, heritage, and the responsibility we have to the land and community. Your mother would be heartbroken to hear it described as underperforming." Jessica's face flushed. "Don't use Mom to make me feel guilty. She would have wanted me to be happy and secure. Blake offers that. The farm can still be part of our lives, just evolved. Evolved into condominiums and putting greens," I said bitterly. "You're being dramatic and unfair to Blake," Jessica snapped. "Nothing has been decided, and it's ultimately my future at stake." After that confrontation, I made an appointment with George Wilson, my attorney and friend since high school. Together we created what George called contingency measures regarding the farm's ownership. I hoped I would never need to implement them, but Blake's conversation with his father had shaken my trust to the core. I wanted to believe my daughter would protect our legacy, but the influence of the Thorntons seemed to be overwhelming her connection to the land. As the wedding approached, I prayed for clarity and reconciliation, hoping Jessica would remember who she was and what truly mattered in life. But each interaction with Blake and his family pushed me further toward the conclusion that they viewed our farm as nothing more than a real estate opportunity, and me as an inconvenient obstacle to their plans. The week before the wedding, I drove to Chicago with a heavy heart. The Winthrop Hotel lived up to its reputation for opulence with marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and an army of staff who seemed to materialize whenever a guest had the slightest need. My room, while undoubtedly luxurious, felt foreign with its sleek modern furniture and city views that showed not a single tree or open space. I missed the simple comfort of my farmhouse, where the wooden floors creaked familiarly and windows framed views of rolling cropland. The contrast between my world and the Thorntons became painfully clear at Jessica's bachelorette celebration, which had been transformed from the traditional night out with girlfriends into a formal luncheon at an exclusive women's club. I attended briefly to give Jessica a special gift, a pearl necklace that had belonged to her mother. The other guests, primarily friends of Blake's mother Eleanor and Jessica's new Chicago social circle, eyed my off-the-rack suit with thinly veiled judgment. "So, you actually still work your land yourself?" "How quaint," remarked one woman. A friend of Eleanor's, whose name I didn't catch. "Most agricultural investments are managed by corporations these days, aren't they? The Anderson farm isn't an investment portfolio," I explained, trying to keep my tone friendly. "It's a working family operation with employees who've been with us for generations." "Well, I'm sure once Jessica and Blake settle in, they'll modernize things," she replied with a dismissive wave. "Eleanor mentioned they have wonderful plans for the property." I glanced across the room where Jessica sat with Eleanor and several bridesmaids looking beautiful, but somehow unfamiliar in her expensive new clothes and sophisticated hairstyle. She caught my eye and smiled, but there was a distance in her expression that hadn't been there a year ago. I wondered if she was already imagining our farm transformed into the resort her future father-in-law had described. That evening, both families gathered for what was described as a casual dinner at the Thornton home, though the catering and service were more elaborate than any restaurant meal I'd ever experienced. Gerald commanded the conversation with the easy authority of a man accustomed to being the center of attention. Topics ranged from politics to business to vacation properties, with frequent name-dropping of influential connections. "Phillip," Gerald said, suddenly. Turning his attention to me during dessert, "Blake tells me your southeastern acreage has exceptional drainage patterns. That would be ideal for the first phase of development." The table fell silent as all eyes turned to me. I set down my fork carefully. "My land isn't being developed, Gerald. It's a working farm, and will remain so." Gerald chuckled, as if I'd made a charming joke. Of course, but forward thinking is essential in today's economy. Agricultural properties across the country are being repurposed for higher yield investments. Blake has some excellent projections on potential returns if portions of the Anderson property were thoughtfully redeveloped. "The farm isn't a property to be carved up for profit," I said firmly. "It's a legacy and a living ecosystem. Jessica understands that." All eyes turned to my daughter, who looked uncomfortably between Blake and me. "I think there's room for compromise," she said carefully. "Some portions of the farm could be used differently, while preserving the essential character." Blake jumped in smoothly. "We've been discussing a hybrid approach that honors the Anderson heritage while maximizing potential. Jessica has some innovative ideas about creating an agricultural theme experience that would actually educate people about farming. It's quite brilliant." "An agricultural theme experience," I repeated incredulously. You mean like a petting zoo version of the real work we do? Dad, Jessica warned quietly. Blake continued as if I hadn't spoken. We're thinking of it as an investment in the future, a way to secure Jessica's financial independence while preserving the elements of the farm that matter most. Eleanor Thornton, immaculate in designer evening wear, that probably cost more than my pickup truck, patted my hand condescendingly. Change is always difficult, Philip, but Jessica deserves the opportunities that come with progress. Blake can provide a lifestyle that farming simply can't match. I looked at Jessica, searching for the daughter who once declared she would never leave the land, who understood that our farm wasn't just a business, but a sacred trust. Her eyes dropped to her plate, unable to meet mine. I think I need some air, I said, excusing myself from the table. On the Thorntons' expansive terrace, I called George Wilson. I need to accelerate our contingency plan, I told him quietly. I'll explain everything after the wedding, but be prepared to file those papers immediately afterward. That bad? George asked, concern evident in his voice. Worse, I replied. They're already dividing up the farm like vultures, and Jessica seems caught in the middle. I need to protect the land until she remembers who she really is. The night before the wedding, after the rehearsal dinner, I managed to find a moment alone with Jessica. We stood on the hotel's rooftop garden, the Chicago skyline glittering around us in stark contrast to our starlit farm fields. Are you happy, Jess? I asked simply. She seemed startled by the question. Of course I am. Blake is wonderful, and this wedding is a dream come true. Is it your dream, though, or theirs? I gestured toward the opulent hotel that housed the Thornton version of what her special day should be. Jessica sighed. Dad, please don't start this again. Not the night before my wedding. I'm not trying to cause problems. I just need to know that you're making these choices not just following Blake's lead, especially regarding the farm. The farm will always be special to me, she said, but her tone lacked conviction. But life moves forward. Blake has shown me possibilities I never imagined. Possibilities that include destroying what 5 generations of Andersons have built. Her face hardened. That's unfair. We're talking about adaptation, not destruction. The farm can't stay frozen in time forever just because you're afraid of change. It's not change I fear, I said quietly. It's losing the heart and soul of what makes that land special. Your mother understood that. I thought you did too. Jessica's eyes glistened with tears, whether from emotion or frustration I couldn't tell. Can't you just be happy for me? Just for tomorrow. I pulled her into a hug, feeling her stiffen before reluctantly returning the embrace. I want your happiness more than anything in the world, Jessica. I just hope you still know where to find it. Then as I lay awake that night in my hotel room, I realized that tomorrow would determine not just Jessica's future, but the fate of everything the Andersons had built through generations of hard work and sacrifice. I prayed for wisdom and strength to face whatever came. The morning of Jessica's wedding dawned clear and bright sunlight streaming through my hotel window far earlier than I needed to wake. Old farmers' habits die hard, and I found myself fully alert at 5:30, though the ceremony wouldn't begin until 2 that afternoon. I lay in bed thinking about Jessica as a little girl, fearlessly climbing the apple trees in our small orchard, helping deliver calves in the middle of the night, falling asleep on my lap during long tractor rides. By 9, I was showered, shaved, and carefully dressed in the new suit I'd purchased for the occasion, a dark gray 3-piece that cost more than I'd ever spent on clothing, but still undoubtedly fell short of Thornton standards. I'd polished my good dress shoes to a military shine and wore the silver bolo tie that had been my father's, the only piece of the outfit that truly felt like me. At 11, I was allowed access to the bridal suite to see Jessica before the photographers arrived. The moment she turned to face me in her wedding dress, my breath caught. despite the elaborate styling and designer gown that seemed to belong to a different world than ours. For a moment, I saw Martha looking back at me, her gentle smile lighting up our daughter's face. "You look beautiful, sweetheart," I managed to say, past the lump in my throat. "Your mother would be so proud." Jessica's carefully made-up face softened with genuine emotion. "I wish she was here." "She is in a way," I said, pulling out a small velvet box. "I was saving this for when you were alone, but now seems right." Inside was Martha's wedding ring, a simple gold band that had adorned her finger for 17 years of marriage. "Mom wanted you to have this on your wedding day," I explained. "Not necessarily to wear, but to carry with you. A piece of her to take into your new life." Tears welled in Jessica's eyes as she carefully took the ring. "I was going to use Blake's grandmother's ring as my something old, but this—" "You don't have to change your plans," I said quickly. "I just wanted you to have it." "No, this is perfect." She slipped the ring onto her right hand, where it sat alongside the massive diamond engagement ring Blake had given her. The contrast between the two couldn't have been more striking. The modest band seeming to represent our family's values, while the diamond reflected the world she was entering. "Dad," Jessica said hesitantly. "About the farm." There was a sharp knock at the door before it swung open to reveal Blake's mother, Eleanor. The wedding planner, Vivian, and a photographer. "Jessica, darling, we need to start photos immediately," Eleanor announced, barely acknowledging my presence. "Blake's grandfather isn't feeling well, so we need to capture him with the couple before he retires to his room." Jessica squeezed my hand apologetically as she was swept away. Our moment of connection interrupted before she could finish her thought about the farm. I was left wondering if she had been about to reassure me or confirm my fears. The ceremony itself was as lavish as expected, held in the grand ballroom that had been transformed into a cathedral-like space with imported flowers, custom lighting, and seating for 200 guests. I escorted Jessica down the aisle with a mixture of pride and melancholy, conscious that I was symbolically giving my daughter not just to Blake, but to the entire Thornton world he represented. When the minister asked, "Who gives this woman to be married?" I hesitated just a fraction of a second long enough for Blake to give me a sharp look before I answered. "Her mother and I do." I kissed Jessica's cheek, placed her hand in Blake's, and took my assigned seat in the front row, separate from where the Thornton parents sat on the opposite side. Throughout the ceremony, I noticed Blake's father Gerald engaged in quiet conversation with several men in expensive suits, occasionally gesturing subtly toward me. Their expressions, as they glanced my way, were calculating, assessing like developers, eyeing a property rather than guests witnessing a sacred union. I recognized one as a state senator, known for his pro-development stance on agricultural zoning. Another as the CEO of a luxury resort chain. They weren't here to celebrate my daughter, I realized, but to evaluate their next investment opportunity, my farm. After the vows were exchanged and the newlyweds presented to the applauding crowd, we moved to an adjacent ballroom for the reception. The space was unrecognizable from the hotel's standard configuration, having been completely reimagined, with elaborate floral installations, custom lighting, and table settings that probably cost more than a season's crop yield from 10 acres. My table was positioned far from the head table, where Jessica and Blake sat with his parents and the most distinguished guests. Instead, I found myself seated with distant Thornton relatives who made minimal effort at conversation once they realized I was just the bride's father, not a useful business connection. When the time came for toasts, I approached the microphone with carefully prepared notes, determined to honor Jessica properly, despite feeling increasingly out of place. I spoke of her childhood on the farm, her mother's influence on her compassionate nature, and the pride I felt seeing her grow into such a remarkable woman. I mentioned specific memories, like teaching her to drive a tractor at 10, her first 4-H blue ribbon, and the night we stayed up counting meteor showers from our front porch. The Anderson farm isn't just land, I concluded, looking directly at my daughter. It's the story of our family written in soil and sweat, in fence posts and barn beams. Jessica, you carry that heritage with you always, no matter where life takes you. May your marriage be blessed with the same strength, resilience, and deep roots that have sustained our farm through 5 generations. The applause was polite but subdued. I noticed Gerald Thornton leaning toward the state senator, whispering something that made both men smirk. Blake was on his phone, even as the clapping continued, apparently uninterested in my heartfelt words about his new wife's heritage. As the evening progressed, I watched Jessica circulate among guests. I didn't know, speaking the language of a social world I would never understand. She seemed happy, though occasionally I caught a glimpse of uncertainty in her eyes when she thought no one was watching. Or perhaps that was just a father's hopeful imagination. Around 9 o'clock, after dinner had been served, and the professional dancers Blake's parents had hired performed a choreographed routine, Blake stood to make what was announced as a special presentation. He had been drinking steadily throughout the evening, his face flushed, and movement slightly exaggerated as he took the microphone. I want to thank everyone for coming to celebrate our special day. He began his words just precise enough to indicate he was controlling a significant level of intoxication. The joining of the Thornton and Anderson families represents more than just a marriage. It represents a vision for the future. Gerald nodded approvingly from his seat, while Eleanor beamed at her son. Jessica looked slightly confused, this apparently not being a planned part of the reception program. As many of you know, Blake continued, my beautiful bride comes from agricultural royalty in Nebraska. The Anderson farm has been a cornerstone of their community for generations. I tensed, not liking the direction this was taking. But tonight, I'm excited to announce that this legacy will be entering a new chapter of prosperity and innovation. Blake raised his glass toward the tables, where I recognized several developers and investors. Some of you have already expressed interest in our vision for Blue Creek Acres Resort and Golf Community, the most exclusive new development in the Midwest, featuring luxury accommodations in an authentic rural setting. A murmur ran through the room. Jessica's eyes widened as she turned to Blake in evident confusion. This was clearly not something she had expected him to announce publicly tonight. The centerpiece of this development will be the historic Anderson farmhouse and barn, preserved as the rustic heart of a thoroughly modern resort experience. Blake gestured grandly. 5-star dining championship golf exclusive residences, all centered around a quaint agricultural theme park that educates while it entertains. I could hardly believe what I was hearing. Blake was publicly announcing the destruction of my family's legacy as if it were a done deal at his wedding reception, no less. To make this vision official, Blake continued, turning toward me with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, I'd like to invite my new father-in-law, Phillip Anderson, to join me for a symbolic handover. The spotlight suddenly found me at my distant table, and all eyes in the room turned my way. Phillip, Blake called, his voice carrying an unmistakable note of triumph. Would you please come up and present the keys to the Anderson farm, officially transferring this valuable heritage into our joint stewardship? I sat frozen, aware of the hundreds of eyes on me, including Jessica's shocked expression. Blake had blindsided us both with this public spectacle, forcing a situation where refusing would make me appear the villain disrupting his wedding celebration. Slowly I stood and made my way to where Blake stood center stage. Jessica had moved to his side, whispering urgently in his ear, but he merely patted her hand dismissively. "Blake," I said quietly when I reached him, "this isn't the time or place for business discussions. Let's enjoy your wedding and talk about the farm later." Blake's smile tightened. "Nonsense, Phillip. Our investors are here, the plans are ready, and this symbolic gesture will make for wonderful photos." He held out his hand. "The keys to the farm, please. Let's make this transition official." "I'm not giving you the keys to my farm," I said, keeping my voice level but firm. "Especially not as some publicity stunt for investors you invited to my daughter's wedding without my knowledge." Blake's face darkened. "Don't be difficult, old man. Jessica has already agreed to our development plans. The farm will be transferred to her after the wedding anyway. This is merely ceremonial." I turned to Jessica. "Is that true? Have you agreed to turn our farm into a resort?" Jessica looked trapped, her eyes darting between her new husband and me. We discussed some possibilities, but I never agreed to announce anything today. "See, just a misunderstanding," Blake said smoothly, though his eyes had hardened. "Now about those keys, Phillip. Don't embarrass your daughter on her special day." "I'm not giving you my keys," I repeated. "And I'm not signing over my farm to be destroyed by developers, ceremonially or otherwise." The room had grown uncomfortably quiet, the guests witnessing the tense exchange with expressions ranging from embarrassment to voyeuristic interest. Blake stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You backward old fool. That farm would have collapsed years ago without Jessica's inheritance from her mother providing cash flow. You're living in the past, and I won't let you drag my wife down with your sentimentality about worthless dirt and rusty tractors." His words hit like physical blows. Martha's modest inheritance had indeed helped during some lean years, but the farm had been profitable on its own for the past decade, thanks to our organic certification and specialty crops. Blake was deliberately misrepresenting our financial situation to pressure me. "That farm has sustained my family for 5 generations," I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "It will continue to do so long after your resort schemes have failed. My answer is no." Blake's face contorted with rage. Before I could react, he swung his open hand, striking me across the face with surprising force. The blow caught me off guard, and I staggered backward, nearly losing my balance before catching myself on a nearby chair. A collective gasp rose from the guests. Jessica cried out, "Blake!" in horror, while Gerald Thornton was already moving toward us. Damage control evident in his expression. My cheek stinging dignity in tatters, I made the only decision I could. Without a word, I straightened my jacket, turned, and walked steadily toward the exit. Behind me, I heard the beginning of chaos. Blake's slurred protestations, Jessica's distressed voice, Gerald attempting to reclaim control of the situation. In the quiet of the hotel corridor, I pulled out my cell phone and made the call I had hoped would never be necessary. "George," I said when my attorney answered, "initiate the Anderson Farm Protection Protocol immediately. Every document we prepared. Yes, right now." As I ended the call, I heard the reception doors burst open behind me. Blake stormed into the hallway, face flushed with alcohol and rage. "You can't do this," he shouted, several guests now watching from the doorway. "That land is as good as mine. We have investors' committed plans approved, Jessica's signature on preliminary documents." I turned to face him calmly. "Blake, I just legally transferred the Anderson farm into an irrevocable conservation trust that prohibits any non-agricultural development for the next 75 years. The trust is overseen by a board of local farmers with Jessica as a member only if she actively works the land." Blake's face went from red to white in seconds. "You can't. That's not. We have contracts. Any documents Jessica may have signed are meaningless. She doesn't own the farm, and now neither do I. It belongs to itself and to the future generations who will farm it properly." Blake lunged toward me, but was caught by his father and best man, who had followed him into the hallway. "You've ruined everything," he shouted as they restrained him. "Do you know how much money we've borrowed against the projected revenue from that development?" Millions were leveraged to the hilt on this deal, and there it was. The truth finally revealed in his panic. This wasn't about honoring the Anderson legacy or even making a sound business investment. The Thorntons were in financial trouble and had been counting on my farm to bail them out, likely taking predatory loans based on projected profits from a development that could never have succeeded in rural Nebraska anyway. "I'm sorry you built castles on my cornfields, Blake," I said quietly. But that land was never for sale. In the hours following Blake's public outburst, the beautiful wedding reception deteriorated into a scene of confusion and damage control. Blake dragged back into the ballroom by his father, and groomsmen could be heard shouting about financial ruin and betrayal. Guests began leaving in uncomfortable droves, the celebration atmosphere thoroughly shattered by the revelation of the Thorntons' ulterior motives. I waited in the hotel lobby, unwilling to simply disappear before speaking with Jessica. I didn't have to wait long. Within 20 minutes, she emerged from the elevator still in her wedding gown, but with makeup streaked by tears. "Dad," she said, her voice unsteady. "What just happened? What did you do?" I gestured to a quiet corner where we could speak privately. "I protected our farm from being turned into a golf course. I'm sorry it happened this way, Jessica. I truly am. But the trust, the board of farmers, when did you arrange all this?" "After I overheard Blake and Gerald discussing their development plans 2 months ago. I hoped I'd never have to activate it, but I couldn't take the chance." Jessica sank into a chair, the voluminous skirts of her wedding dress pooling around her. "Blake is upstairs having a complete meltdown. He says they've taken out massive loans based on the projected resort revenue. Gerald is on the phone with their investors, trying to explain that the deal has fallen through." I sat beside her. "Honey, they were using you to get to our land. They saw you as the key to acquiring the Anderson farm, not as someone to love and cherish for who you are." "I never signed anything," Jessica said slowly. "Blake showed me some conceptual drawings, talked about modernizing parts of the farm someday, but I never agreed to any resort development. I told him we would discuss options after we were settled." She looked up at me, realization dawning in her eyes. "He lied to his father and their investors, didn't he? Made them think I was completely on board when I wasn't." Before I could respond, Blake appeared with his father and 3 men I recognized from the reception as business associates. Blake's face was still flushed with alcohol and rage, while Gerald maintained a veneer of control despite the evident tension in his posture. "There you are," Blake snapped when he spotted Jessica. "Come upstairs. We need to discuss how to fix your father's sabotage." "Don't speak to my daughter that way," I said, rising to stand beside her. Gerald stepped forward, his tone measured but cold. "Phillip, I understand you're upset about Blake's approach, but surely we can resolve this situation like businessmen. The Anderson farm has tremendous development potential that would benefit everyone, including you. We're prepared to offer very generous terms." "The farm isn't for sale or development at any price," I replied. "It's now legally protected as agricultural land, as it should be." "Those documents can be challenged," one of the men interjected. "No trust is completely ironclad." "Feel free to try," came a new voice from behind us. George Wilson approached, briefcase in hand and legal confidence in his stride. "The Anderson Farm Conservation Trust was established with meticulous attention to legal precedent and environmental protection statutes. I'd be happy to walk you through why your challenge would fail, Mr. Thornton." Blake lunged forward, jabbing his finger toward me. "You planned this. You deliberately sabotaged our development, knowing how much we had invested in preliminary work. You attempted to appropriate my family's legacy through my daughter, I replied evenly. I simply ensured that couldn't happen. Do you have any idea what you've done? Blake shouted. We're leveraged to the eyeballs on this project. The Lincoln Heights development is already underwater, and we needed this resort to recover those losses. Jessica stood slowly looking at her new husband with growing horror. You married me to save your family business. This whole time, that was your motivation. Don't be dramatic, Blake snapped. I would have married you anyway. The farm was a bonus, a way to solve multiple problems at once. A bonus, Jessica repeated incredulously. My family's legacy was a bonus to our relationship. One of the business associates stepped forward, addressing Gerald. You assured us the acquisition of the Anderson property was secure. We've already invested considerable capital in preparation and created marketing materials, advertising a resort that doesn't exist, George added, which potentially constitutes fraud, especially if you've accepted deposits or investment based on misrepresentations. Gerald's composed facade began to crack. We had every reason to believe the property would be available through our connection to Jessica. Connection, Jessica echoed. Is that what I am to your family? A connection to valuable real estate? Blake attempted to take her hand, his demeanor suddenly shifting to conciliatory. Baby, you're twisting everything. Of course I love you. The farm was just good business sense. We can still make this work. Your father can't keep the land from you forever. Actually, I can, I said quietly. The trust is legally binding. Jessica can participate in running the farm as a working agricultural operation, but it cannot be sold or developed. Not by me, not by her, not by anyone for 75 years. Blake turned to Jessica desperately. Tell him to undo it. This is our future at stake. Jessica looked between her new husband and me, the conflict evident in her expression. But when she spoke, her voice had found new resolve. You lied to me, Blake. You presented this as a vague future possibility, not a done deal with investors already committed. You used our wedding to network with potential partners for a business venture you knew I hadn't agreed to. Business sometimes requires strategic timing, Gerald interjected smoothly. Blake perhaps got ahead of himself with tonight's announcement, but the concept is sound. The Anderson farm would be preserved in spirit while generating significantly more revenue as a resort property. Preserved in spirit, Jessica repeated. By turning it into a theme park version of itself, by replacing fields that have fed people for generations with golf courses and luxury cabins. I felt a surge of pride, hearing my daughter speak the values I had feared she'd abandoned. The real Jessica was still there beneath the Thornton veneer that had temporarily overlaid her true self. Blake must have sensed he was losing control of the situation. His expression darkened again. This is ridiculous. You're my wife now. Your loyalty should be to me and our future, not some outdated family farm and your stubborn old father. My loyalty, Jessica said carefully, is to truth and integrity, something I'm realizing you know very little about. The arrival of Eleanor Thornton added another layer to the tense scene. What is happening? Guests are leaving in droves. The photographer is asking if we want to continue with planned shots. She noticed the business associates and frowned. Why are you discussing business now? This is your wedding reception. Because your son and husband have been planning to liquidate my family's farm without my knowledge or consent, Jessica replied before Blake could speak. Apparently this wedding was as much a business merger as a marriage. Eleanor's perfectly composed expression faltered. Gerald, is this true? It's more complicated than that, Gerald began, but was interrupted by the arrival of the state senator I had noticed earlier. Gerald, what the hell is going on? Morton just told me the Blue Creek project is off the table. I've been working for months to ease zoning restrictions in that county based on your assurances. More pieces fell into place. The Thorntons hadn't just been counting on acquiring my land. They'd been manipulating political connections to change regulations that would have affected all the farms in our region. This was larger than just my property. Blake, seeing his carefully constructed plans collapsing, made one final desperate attempt. "Jessica, listen to me. We can salvage this. Your father's trust can be contested. We just need you to sign some papers indicating you were promised the farm and that he created this trust maliciously to deny your inheritance." "You want me to sue my own father?" Jessica asked incredulously. "To destroy the very thing that makes our family who we are? It's just land," Blake exploded. "Dirt and old buildings that are costing us millions in lost opportunity." Jessica slowly removed her wedding ring, the enormous diamond catching the light as she placed it in Blake's palm. "No, it's my heritage and my future. I was just too blinded by you to remember that." She turned to face Gerald and Eleanor. "I'm sorry, but I can't be part of your family under these circumstances. I'll be filing for annulment immediately." Blake stared at the ring in his hand, then at Jessica with a mixture of shock and rage. "You can't do this. Do you have any idea how much this wedding cost? How much we've invested in this relationship?" "Apparently that's all it ever was to you," Jessica replied quietly. "An investment with expected returns." I placed my arm around my daughter's shoulders, feeling her trembling slightly, despite her strong words. "George has a car waiting. Let's go." As we turned to leave, Gerald called after us. "This isn't over, Anderson. We'll contest that trust. We'll sue for breach of promise." George paused, turning back with professional calm. "Mr. Thornton, I have documented evidence of your son's misrepresentations to investors about property he did not own and had no firm agreement to acquire. Would you like to discuss that with these gentlemen before making threats?" The business associates were already turning to Gerald with expressions ranging from concern to anger. The distraction gave us the opportunity to make our exit, Jessica holding her voluminous wedding dress as we quickly moved through the lobby toward the hotel's side entrance. In the car, Jessica finally broke down sobbing as the events of the day crashed over her. I held her as George drove us away from the Winthrop Hotel and the life she had almost committed to. "I've been such a fool, Dad," she managed between tears. "I let them change me, make me forget what matters." "You remembered when it counted," I assured her, stroking her hair like I had when she was small. "Can we go home?" she asked simply. "To the farm?" "Yes, sweetheart," I replied, feeling a weight lift from my heart. "We're going home." The fallout from Jessica's wedding was as dramatic as the event itself. By the time we reached Nebraska the following day, business and society columns in Chicago were already reporting on the Thornton wedding disaster and the resort deal collapse. Jessica's phone buzzed constantly with calls and messages from Blake, his family, and curious wedding guests, until she finally turned it off entirely. Within 24 hours, the true extent of the Thorntons' financial troubles became apparent. Their seemingly solid real estate empire had been leveraging each new project to cover losses from the previous one for years. The Lincoln Heights development Gerald had mentioned in passing had actually been a massive failure, with cost overruns and permit issues that had drained millions from their reserves. Blake and Gerald had been counting on the Blue Creek Acres Resort to attract fresh investment and bail out their overextended company. They had already taken deposits from potential vacation home buyers, secured loans against projected revenue, and made commitments to contractors, all based on land they didn't own, and now never would. As we sat at my kitchen table, George Wilson outlined what he had discovered through his investigation. "They've been operating on the edge of legality for some time," he explained, spreading documents before us. "Using one property to secure loans for another, shifting assets between shell companies to mask losses. When I suspected they were targeting your farm, Phillip, I started digging into their financial situation. Jessica, still in shock, but becoming clearer with each passing hour, studied the papers. So that's why Blake was so insistent on announcing the development at the wedding. They needed to make it public to secure additional funding. And why he became hysterical when he realized the farm was protected, I added. Without it, their house of cards collapses. Which is exactly what's happening, George confirmed. 3 of their creditors called in loans this morning after news of the failed resort plan. The State Banking Commission is opening an investigation into their lending practices, and 2 investors have already filed lawsuits alleging misrepresentation. Jessica rubbed her temples. What about the annulment? Given the circumstances, including Blake's public assault on your father and the evidence of misrepresentation regarding his intentions for marriage, we have strong grounds. I've already filed the paperwork. And as George continued explaining the legal proceedings, Jessica suddenly stood and walked to the kitchen window that overlooked our eastern fields, now golden with ripening wheat. I almost threw this away, she said quietly. All of it. For what penthouses and country clubs and people who measure worth on square footage and account balances. I joined her at the window. You were dazzled by a different world. It happens. But I should have known better. I grew up understanding what matters. She gestured toward the fields. This matters. Growing food, stewarding the land, continuing what our family built. It's not too late, I assured her. The farm is still here. It will always be here for you. Jessica turned to face me, determination replacing the confusion that had clouded her eyes since the wedding. I want to come home, Dad. Not just temporarily, but for good. I want to run the farm with you, implement those sustainable agriculture plans I studied in college, make this place even stronger for the future. Relief and joy washed through me. Nothing would make me happier. Over the following days, the Thornton empire continued to crumble. News reports detailed how Gerald had been operating a near Ponzi scheme, using new development projects to cover losses from failing ones. Blake had apparently been aware of the precarious situation and had targeted Jessica specifically after learning about the Anderson farm and its development potential. Eleanor Thornton filed for divorce when it became clear Gerald had mortgaged their primary residence without her knowledge. Blake disappeared temporarily, reportedly fleeing to Mexico to escape creditors and angry investors, only to be detained at the border when trying to return. The scandal expanded to include the state senator and several other officials who had accepted favors from the Thorntons in exchange for zoning accommodations. Meanwhile, Jessica immersed herself in farm work with renewed passion. She approached each task from checking irrigation systems to planning fall plantings with the enthusiasm I remembered from her childhood, but now enhanced by her education and fresh perspective. We should expand the organic acreage, she suggested one evening as we reviewed the farm's financials together. The premium is significant, and I have contacts from school who could help us secure larger contracts with restaurant groups looking for verified sustainable produce. That's exactly the kind of thinking the farm needs, I agreed. Your mother would be so proud to see you taking charge this way. Jessica fingered the simple gold band she still wore on her right hand. Martha's wedding ring, now a symbol of her reconnection to her true heritage. I think she somehow helped save me from making the worst mistake of my life. As summer transitioned to fall, news came that Blake had accepted a plea deal on fraud charges related to the misrepresentation of assets to investors. The Thornton Development Company filed for bankruptcy protection, with creditors picking over the remains of what had once appeared to be a thriving enterprise. Jessica's annulment was granted without contest. Blake apparently eager to sever ties that now represented failure rather than opportunity. One crisp October afternoon, about 3 months after the wedding, that wasn't Jessica and I stood on the rise overlooking our northern fields, watching the harvest crew bring in the last of the season's soybeans. The setting sun bathed everything in golden light, the same land that had sustained Andersons for 5 generations, continuing its cycles of renewal and bounty. "I can't believe I almost let them turn this into golf courses and vacation cabins," Jessica said, shaking her head. "What was I thinking?" "You were thinking you were in love," I replied gently. "We all make mistakes when our hearts are involved." "Well, my heart is here now," she said firmly. "With the farm, with our legacy." She hesitated before adding, "I've been talking with Michael Davidson. He's back from his agricultural extension work in Kenya, looking to settle somewhere he can apply what he learned about sustainable farming practices." Michael had been Jessica's friend since high school, a thoughtful young man who had pursued agricultural development work after college. I had always liked him, appreciated his genuine respect for farming life. "He'd be a valuable consultant," I said, carefully noting the slight blush that colored my daughter's cheeks. "Yes, for the farm," she agreed quickly. "But also we've been talking a lot about shared values and compatible dreams. It's early, but different than it was with Blake. Real." I nodded, understanding what she wasn't quite ready to articulate. "Take your time. The right relationship will complement the life you want, not try to change it." As we walked back toward the farmhouse that had sheltered Anderson since 1922, I felt a profound sense of rightness. The farm would continue, strengthened by Jessica's education and fresh vision, protected from those who would have destroyed its essential character for profit. I had nearly lost everything that mattered, nearly seen 5 generations of careful stewardship erased for luxury cabins and pudding greens. Instead, the land would continue feeding people, continue supporting wildlife in its uncultivated corners, continue standing as a testament to the values of hard work, perseverance, and respect for the earth that had guided our family for over a century. "I was thinking," Jessica said as we reached the house, "about establishing an educational program here, inviting school groups to learn about sustainable agriculture, offering internships for agricultural students. Mom always talked about doing something like that." "Your mother would love that idea," I agreed. The Anderson farm becoming not just a place that grows food, but grows knowledge too. Jessica smiled, the confident, purposeful expression I had feared I might never see again. "The Thorntons thought our farm was valuable because of what could be built on it. They never understood its true worth lies in what it already is." As darkness fell and lights came on in the old farmhouse, I silently thanked whatever Providence had given me the strength to stand firm that night at the wedding, to say no when saying yes would have been easier in the moment. Sometimes, protecting what matters means being willing to walk away, even when doing so breaks your heart. Sometimes true love for your children means letting them discover their own way back to what's real and enduring. The Anderson farm would continue not as a relic of the past, but as a living, evolving testament to values that never lose their relevance, a heritage more precious than any resort development could ever be. A year has passed since that fateful wedding day, when Blake Thornton's true intentions were revealed, and Jessica found her way back to the farm and her authentic self. The seasons have completed their cycle, crops have been planted and harvested, and our lives have settled into a new rhythm that somehow feels both fresh and familiar. The Anderson Farm Conservation Trust has proven its worth beyond simply protecting our land from development. Its structure has allowed us to implement progressive agricultural practices while ensuring the property remains a working farm for generations to come. The board of local farmers who serve as trustees brings diverse perspectives and collective wisdom to decisions about land management, water conservation, and sustainable practices. Jessica has blossomed in her role as the farm's active manager. The business degree that once seemed like it might take her away from agricultural life has instead become the foundation for innovations that have increased our productivity and profitability while reducing our environmental impact. Under her leadership, we've expanded our organic certification to cover 80% of our acreage installed solar panels that provide most of our electrical needs, and implemented precision irrigation systems that have reduced our water usage by nearly 30%. The educational program Jessica envisioned has become reality. Last spring, we hosted 15 school tours, 2 college agricultural programs, and launched a summer internship that brought 4 promising students to live and work on the farm. The old bunkhouse has been renovated to accommodate visitors, and Jessica has created a curriculum that balances practical farming experience with lessons on agricultural economics and environmental stewardship. As for the Thorntons, their fall from grace was swift and comprehensive. Gerald ultimately received a 5-year sentence for fraud and misappropriation of investor funds. The investigation revealed that Thornton Development had been essentially insolvent for years, using each new project to cover losses from previous failures. Their mansion was sold at auction, their assets liquidated to partially repay creditors and investors. Blake avoided prison through a plea agreement that required full cooperation with prosecutors, but his reputation in Chicago business circles was destroyed. Last we heard, he was working for a distant cousin's real estate office in Arizona, starting over at entry level, with his name removed from the family's disgraced company. The most unexpected development in our story has been Jessica's relationship with Michael Davidson. What began as professional consultation on sustainable farming techniques gradually blossomed into something deeper. Michael's 3 years working with farming communities in Kenya had given him invaluable insights into efficient, low-impact agriculture, perfectly complementing Jessica's business acumen. Their courtship progressed naturally, without the whirlwind pace or material showmanship that characterized her relationship with Blake. Instead of luxury restaurants and exclusive clubs, they connected over shared work, common values, and genuine respect for each other's strengths. Michael understood inherently what Blake never could, that the Anderson farm wasn't just land or assets, but a living heritage that deserved preservation and growth. 4 months ago, Michael proposed to Jessica under the old oak tree where she had once dreamed of being married. The engagement ring he offered was modest compared to Blake's ostentatious diamond, but its significance was immeasurably greater, designed with a small stone from Martha's favorite necklace that I had preserved for just such an occasion. Their wedding, held last month on the farm, was everything the Chicago spectacle wasn't: a genuine celebration of love and community rather than a business networking event disguised as a marriage. 150 guests, mostly neighbors, family friends, and agricultural colleagues, gathered under tents in our north meadow. The ceremony took place beneath the arbor Jessica and I had built years before, finally fulfilling its intended purpose. Jessica wore a simple dress made by our neighbor Mrs. Peterson, carrying wildflowers gathered from the farm's uncultivated corners rather than imported exotic blooms. Michael stood tall in a navy suit, nervous but resolute as he waited for his bride. I walked Jessica down an aisle of freshly cut hay, my heart nearly bursting with pride and gratitude that she had found her way back to this place, to these values, to a man who treasured her for exactly who she was. When the minister asked, "Who gives this woman to be married?" I answered confidently, "Her mother and I do," knowing without doubt that Martha would have wholeheartedly approved of this union. As I placed Jessica's hand in Michael's, I saw not the end of my role in her life, but its natural evolution. The reception featured food grown on our own land, or sourced from neighboring farms. Tables were decorated with mason jars of wildflowers, hay bales served as rustic seating, and local musicians played folk tunes as the sun set over fields that had sustained our family for generations. When Jessica and Michael danced their first dance as husband and wife, the joy radiating from them was authentic, unburdened by pretense or hidden agendas. Later, when Michael spoke his vows to Jessica, he included a promise that brought tears to my eyes. "I pledge to honor not just you, but the land and legacy you come from, to be a worthy steward of the Anderson farm alongside you, respecting its past while building its future." Now, as I prepare to move into the renovated cottage at the edge of the property, giving the main farmhouse to Jessica and Michael as they begin their life together, I reflect on how close we came to losing everything that matters. Had I surrendered to Blake's demands that night, had I handed over those keys in a misguided attempt to avoid conflict, our family's legacy would now be bulldozed for golf courses and vacation homes. The land that has fed thousands over generations would be producing nothing but leisure for the wealthy few. Instead, the Anderson farm continues its true purpose, now strengthened by Jessica and Michael's combined vision. They've already expanded our community, supported agriculture program, providing fresh produce to families throughout the county. Their plans include adding an apple orchard next spring, renovating the old dairy barn into an agricultural education center, and implementing innovative crop rotation techniques that promise to increase yields while enhancing soil health. I've learned that sometimes the most important moments in life come disguised as crises. That wedding day confrontation, painful as it was, revealed the truth that might otherwise have remained hidden until it was too late. The slap that left my cheek stinging ultimately saved our farm and my daughter's future happiness. True wealth, I've come to understand even more deeply, isn't measured in dollars or development potential. It's counted in generations of careful stewardship in soil health, maintained across centuries, in the knowledge passed from father to daughter, in work that feeds both body and soul. The Thorntons, for all their mansions and connections, were bankrupt in the ways that truly matter, building their empire on deception rather than honest labor. As I watched Jessica and Michael walking hand in hand through fields gilded by the setting sun, planning next year's crops and dreaming of children who will someday be the 7th generation of Andersons to love this land, I know with absolute certainty that we made the right choice. Some things are indeed worth standing up for, no matter the cost or consequence, because they represent values that sustain us through every season of life. If this story has resonated with you, I'd love to hear about the heritage or values you've fought to protect in your own life. What legacy matters most to you? Have you ever had to make a difficult stand to preserve something precious? Please share your experiences in the comments below. And if you found meaning in our family's journey, consider subscribing to hear more stories of rural wisdom and the enduring strength of agricultural communities. Like and share this video with someone who understands that true wealth grows from the soil of integrity, hard work, and unwavering commitment to what matters most. Thank you for joining me in remembering that some inheritances can't be measured in dollars, only in the depth of roots and the promise of continued harvests.